Good afternoon, good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Just About Managing podcast with me, John Lloyd, with him, Lee Smith, and him, Chris Dingle. So we've got a bridge episode for you this week, which is going to have a bit of reflection, conversation on our last two podcast guests, because they've been coming thick and fast. And then we're going to a little bit of fun on back to school at the end of the show. So I'll launch straight in and kind of reflect on, we've been blessed and lucky with two amazing guests over the last couple of weeks. First with Vince Sanderson and then Nick Reed last week. And actually coming from different perspectives, but actually getting ultimately to the same outcome. I thought it was really interesting with Vince, his ability to just that whole concept around difficult conversations and that calm kind of breakdown and reflection. Okay, where you're at, how you're getting into this conversation. Are you taking baggage in with you? Where are your prejudices, etc. It's for those of you who haven't listened to it, please do. It is a masterclass. He obviously a professional mediator, so it's one of those ones that I most definitely will be going back to, myself when I need to go into difficult conversation, because it's almost like a free coaching call. It felt like, in a way, but delivered in a non-intense manner. So, but yeah, Lee, I don't know what you thought about it.
Exactly the same, John. To be honest, I think we talked about it before. I've listened to it back again, and I will listen to it back again, I'm sure, beyond there. But I think he's I think as a person, he's just got that great demeanour about him that he is calm. He's obviously very well learned, very well experienced, but very, very humble as well in the way he approached it. It wasn't a I know everything type discussion. It was a very open discussion. I thought it was brilliant. But it was the bit for me again in there is it's not until you listen to it that you realise, there was no complexities in there from him at all. It wasn't you need to look at this particular detail in this. It was very matter of fact. It was very straightforward. He was very honest again in there. But I think for me, it was very timely. As I mentioned in the post I put on LinkedIn about it, it's probably one of the biggest topics that comes up in coaching conversations I've had. And one of the things that I could have done with listening to 20 years ago, probably, from a management and leadership perspective in there of, as we said on the call with Vince, we don't get much training in this space at all. And to listen to somebody who really does know it inside out and talk through some of the simplicities of it, if you like, of control the controllables again, not trying to imagine what's going to come back, what the other person's going to say, how they're going to be. The little bits that I picked up on, John and Chris, that I thought were brilliant was, again, things like the facial expressions when you're mediating or having a difficult conversation, not to frown at the wrong point, because how that can be perceived again, and that could change the direction of a conversation. But I just,
or even the opposite. You're right, Lee. Actually, that concept of there's the element of your facial expression, but actually
not reacting to theirs.
Not react to the other person in terms of whether it's that sigh they make or their body language, and actually that has that kind of that maintain that neutrality, which is so hard to do in terms of that driving your own inner emotion. It's again, which is why for me, it's almost like is that clip that you can go back to and listen before you go into, because it's this kind of coaching, right? Just make sure you're thinking about these fundamental elements, which you kind of know.
Yeah.
But you lose sight of unless you're doing that type of conversation week in, week out.
You can almost bookmark the session, couldn't you, for different tips in there? I think the episode. The other thing that I that I really liked in there, that again, it's not until you hear it that you realise how much sense it makes. But we talked about the success rate of having difficult conversations and not anticipating that success. But Vince made a great point of, if you know there's an outcome that you need to get to, stating that outcome up front. And it's not an outcome of having that person understand from this perspective, but we need to get a position where we're both aligned on this, or we need to get to an outcome where we're both heading in this direction, so that you have that intent at the start to open the conversation on, which I thought was brilliant again in there.
Yeah, I mean, common sense is not common practice, right? And what Vince does very, very well is break down something that's incredibly noisy and or avoided or not thought about, and then just, makes it, as you guys said, very simple. So, I mean, the things that I took away from him were mainly around, there's no guarantee here, but you shouldn't avoid these conversations. We're gonna talk about back to school and whatever in like the third bit, and like, putting off bad conversations or not setting yourself up and all that kind of like good stuff. And this kind of all brings it together. And just because something looks simple or is said as simple doesn't mean it is. As Lee, you would know, although you did do rather well on the golf course, you were saying earlier this week, it's incredibly difficult to hit that golf ball or to hit that serve and be, Roger Federer or Messi and knock that ball in the top corner, right? So the more we practice this stuff, and the more we learn from other people is, just vitally important about getting better performance out of yourself and out of the team you're part of. And also, for those of you on the podcast, will probably realise John has a new microphone. So a good thing out of that was Vince sounded like super amazing, right? So, we've all got to up our game in terms of podcast, Bill. I mean, what a lovely guy, right? I think his whole approach, professional mediator, that is just unbelievable skill. I really do wish I'd heard some of that before, but I've heard it now and can all get better. Like each quarter, each year is never over.
Yeah.
No, I agree. So lots of food for thought.
Yeah, one other thing I was just going to add, John, at the end is that the other thing that he said that I don't think we acknowledge a lot of the time, and I've probably realised it a lot through doing these podcasts and through doing coaching accreditation things. But you made that point of actually record yourself and then watch yourself back and see how you come across when you talk, and particularly in preparation for those difficult conversations. What are your facial expressions? What are your potential tells when you're stressed or something? Because the more you can understand those and be aware of them, the more you can then start to have an impact to influence those conversations or not influence those conversations. And I think the door, but it's I think it was, I've actually recommended it's the first time I've done this. I've recommended that podcast episode to 2 or 3 coachees already.
Really?
Because the topic they brought to the conversation was, I need to have a difficult conversation, or I want to be more intentional about the conversations I have in difficult circumstances.
So you said, I can charge you £1 to talk to you about this, or you can go and listen to this podcast for free.
Someone actually knows what they're talking about and listen to him.
So funny you said about listening to yourself, but it was interesting. One of my reflections, so listening to the Vince podcast back, that actually I've started to become, I never will be fully, but I've started to become more accepting and more used to listening to my voice now. The fact that, we do care about our podcast and actually genuinely interested in what's in there, which as a result of it, you have to listen to yourself talk every so often. And some of my reflection of some of the earlier episodes, I just really struggled listening to myself. And so there's a bit of an acceptance there. In terms of, okay, well, how can I learn and improve on that, but be comfortable with that, how my voice sounds.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, right? I mean, you guys would have probably seen this movie, but like nobody likes looking at themselves if they turn into like Woogie out of Just About Mary, like when they like, something goes wrong and they're kind of like all like twitching or like got like pussies and whatever. That's like never a good thing. So, fingers crossed it won't be that bad. right? And we won't all be saved by like Brett Favre at the end of the film, right? But that's still one of my favourite movies. It really is brilliant. So Lee, it's brilliant to have you back this week. All right, and we missed you last week, but we did have an able deputy come in as a guest eagle last week. So we were joined by Nick Reed, who we know from our background at like HSBC, but he's now over at Attain, which is a learning firm. So in the podcast for like through season 1 and into season 2, we've been speaking about like pretty common stuff, right? But things like, diverse teams, remote teams, how do you create engagement within like communities? How do you think about like future big dated trends that are out there? All right. So Nick's organization that he's co-founder of is focused around sustainability learning right now. So that's clearly like a future dated thing. But it's also about how do you release that kind of like power of like diverse teams. So yeah, we missed you, but it was a bit like getting a sub of like, he's a big City fan, so it was a bit like getting a sub of like Haaland on the pitch.
So have I been sacked now? Am I allowed back?
You are definitely allowed back, so tag back in. So that's all good. But yeah, I think that was a really interesting podcast around how organisations and how teams need to change their focus around learning, right? So, John, we were talking about this on the last podcast around, a lot of learning either being like things that you do on your own or things that, are done because you kind of voluntold to do it by the regulator or the organisation. And actually what Attain are trying to do through their game-based learning is to genuinely make things more fun and engaging so people want to do it and then want to kind of like come back and spark that interest. So they're not trying to like solve for like everything in the sustainability space, but what they're trying to do is to plant that seed and plant that curiosity into people. Yes, it was really interesting to hear how they've gone about that.
And it was interesting because and again, we've spoken about this previously in the podcast, but they go through several iterations on the game and they're learning through failure. And it was in terms of a lot of the kind of rather than learning by rote, they're using I guess trusted techniques in terms of that active engagement, driving people to make decisions, and then understanding the outcomes from that through a course of events. It's really simple but really clever at the same time in terms of the what it achieves, and you can see that their model and how they've. I think that trying to do that with a traditional subject, they would have found it quite hard to disrupt the market. So I think that their concept is let's go into a territory that is essentially, let's look at sustainability and learning around that, which wasn't so much out there, and actually get a footprint in there, and then they can reverse engineer into other fields. And actually, it's a fantastic business model to really think about, getting traction. I think that trying to go down, with other learning themes, I think they would have struggled to get that engagement and the investment that they have.
Yeah, and the engagement thing, Lee, around like a game, then talks back to topics that we've spoken about here. So it's really fascinating to get like a live example of somebody trying to grow a business like with their partners in this space, right? In terms of how do you talk to different generations of people, to drive up and to start the conversation. So as John said, a lot of this is around making decisions and then discussing what worked well and didn't work well and learning through that failure and then, seeing those pennies kind of like drop, like between different people and learning off of each other rather than it being like to be frank, quite an insular event that's just you and, the screen or, whatever you're doing and filling in some like result, is it A, B, C, D or, oh my God, Z? Yeah, just a very, very different way of doing it. And you're right, John. Yeah, they're picking an area that is hot in the that younger generation as well. Hopefully that will then be the trigger that they can then look at different markets later. It'd be fascinating to see how they get on.
I'm looking forward to listening to it, because it's not, I said, with missing it and not having a chance to listen back yet, but it sounds excellent. I think the thing for me is, we've talked about offline before, is the views that different guests bring in here, and the different conversation it sparks is exactly what we need, I think. And I think I'm right in saying every guest that we've had would be great to get them back again, because every conversation could continue beyond what we talked about in those sessions as well.
Yeah, you're right. I think that there's a richness from each guest we've had, but each from a slightly different perspective. But it kind of coalesces around our theme of management. And I think it was really interesting with Nick, because he was as much talking about the evolution of the product and how it works as talking to him about his business. And for me personally, I found that genuinely interesting. But it made me go away and actually think about the relevance of that concept of almost like gamification in a broader context in management development and how you utilize that. I think the advantage they have, which I think that they've got a model now, is it's really hard to do that on a one-off. So if you're to go into your own team, the amount of effort you've got to put in, but actually the model they've got is really sound, and it's totally scalable.
Yeah, and that enables them to pivot to like different products and different learnings, right? Within that same environment, so it's based on an island, Lee. That's the idea. And you're kind of like the decision maker, like the Wizard of Oz on this island, kind of saying, right, it will rain over there, or we will sponsor this, or we'll fund this project, or whatever. It's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, definitely worth having a look at and listen to anybody who's like not had a chance yet.
So I think we've really enjoyed having the guests, and we're working on quite a nice pipeline now, thinking about our guests. And I think actually over recent weeks, it's opened our eyes up into the breadth of guests that we can actually bring in. So watch this space. More in the pipeline to come around guests, and we've been actually sort of planning our episodes through to the latter part of this series as well. So looking forward to continue to keep our recordings going. So stay with us. Second half, we're going to talk about back to school. And be interested to see, as always, what Mr. Dingle, Mr. Smith have to bring to the table. Okay, welcome back. Back to school week for a lot of children around the world, and it just kind of prompted me to think about that, both in a comedic sense, but also in a work advice sense. I know with me, when we were kind of getting that back to school week, and you're kind of when I was in a work concept, and actually interestingly now in my sort of acting a CEO role I'm playing at the moment, it's triggered me in thinking about, okay, last quarter, it's all those kind of management hygiene things. Have we had all the difficult conversations we need to have? Are we clear on performance? So it was again, preparing for this, my mind was going off into, I guess, my other work responsibilities, and starting to build out those kind of checklists. But so I don't know whether you guys have got some interesting back to school anecdotes or some constructive back to school work advice that you wanted to share with our fellow podcasters.
Don't take any advice from me. And that's the key. Yeah. Do you know what, when you mentioned it, John, it was that for me again. Maria and myself, we haven't got children ourselves, so we were driving actually yesterday to go into Nottingham for eye tests. The fun and the joys of getting older having eye tests, and as we were going back, there was all the parents dropping the kids off at the school bus, ready to go, all pristinely dressed in their school uniforms, and joking that by the end of that day, probably the first days of school, they were coming back with, I'm sure, grass stains on their knees from playing football and ripped shirts and God knows what happened. And that mixed feeling of the parents dropping them off, I'm sure elation in a lot and sadness in others. But for me, it was that and this goes back to a conversation that we had, Chris, actually, and really triggered with myself when you mentioned it, of going, even in this current environment, having proper downtime and using those school holidays or weekends, whatever it may be, to properly switch off and have that time to refresh yourself so that when you do go back, you're ready to start again. Whether that's being prepared for it and planning ahead, or like I say, just having that mental downtime in there, which again, being completely honest in here, I wasn't very good at. There was people at work who were so good at switching off for that period of downtime and going, right, then when I come back to work, I'll start again. I would always be checking my emails throughout that period, which meant I knew what I was coming back to, which in some ways was a good thing, but in other ways was a bad thing because I never then completely switched off. There was always something on the back of my mind. So it was, for me, when you mentioned it, John, it was that bit of going the real benefit, if you can tap into it and getting that support for it, of switching off when you do get that downtime so that you're ready to go again when you get back to work, and to hit the ground running, hopefully then, without having carried that baggage with you through that holiday period. The one other thing I was going to mention as well was, again, being in a different work environment now and different things, I felt robbed when it came to Bank Holiday Monday. Like, everybody else has got a bank holiday and I haven't. It's just like another day. And it was like, I want a bank holiday weekend. Where's it gone? Someone's taken it away from me. Very different feeling.
God, I'm sure there'll be no sympathy.
Zero.
Like darling in. Like none. God. Mad. Like back to school. So my boys, my oldest is now 17, right? So this is his last year of school. And then my youngest is 15. So this year is like a mega year for us, right? A-levels and GCSEs. Wow, that's going to be great fun, right? So anybody who's been through that or the joy of looking forward to that, like with their kids, well, yeah. I mean, I've got no hair to lose, so what will I get? Some more wrinkles, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But I think, like relating this a bit back to like management, right? And this rather than like nobody wants to go running to teacher or like making a load of noise, right? In terms of when they went back to school, because you wouldn't want to be a telltale and you'd want to, and like a key thing in terms of work environment or whatever is to be able to build good relationships with people. All right. So I do think that work at times is a bit like, a playground, like with other like big kids, like within there. And that can be a bit weird, right? Because you can get people like ganging up, you can get different toxic cultures. Nobody's going to thank you for going and like teacher, any of that kind of stuff. All right. But if it is a playground, then actually the rides in the playground are really exciting and you should try and like enjoy them. That sounds a bit weird, right? But this is certainly something that was always like in my mind, because I remember, one of the things I wanted as like in work was I wanted it to be fun, right? I still want it to be fun. That's really important to me, right? So if as a team we've done anything well, I want us to enjoy that climb to the top of the slide and then to really enjoy the whee, like off the bottom, right? And, being a show off, I would scream as I went down there. It'd be brilliant, right? But then when it comes to other bits of the playground, to go faster and faster and faster, you get more and more momentum on a merry-go-round, like on a, But to do that, you can't go that fast without going a bit slow to start with and getting people to come with you. So in my mind, that's where that kind of, slowing down, getting the engagement would kind of like come from, to get people to kind of, and then collectively you can drive it a lot faster, go a lot faster and pull your legs in and out and spin like super crazy, right? And then feel a bit sick. Oh my God. All right. But, calm down, but it would all be together. And I guess the last one is like the seesaw in the playground at school, right? Like struggling with like other teams or other people because they're all like laid like on the other side of the seesaw. But metaphorically, there's always somebody who's more charismatic or got more skill or, or is like a really good active sponsor who can help and come and like sit on your side of that seesaw. All right. So that isn't an old school story, John, because I'm not sure I can share some of them. Right. But for me, when I think about school, I mean, it's all really similar. Things don't really change. You had arseholes at school and you get them at work, right? But you can't, just bosh them on the nose or whatever, right? So, just interesting, like fascinating kind of like time. Some of this stuff doesn't really change from like 5 to like 55.
No. I think my closing thought, and it kind of links back to our reflections today. And one of the things that we saw with Vince, as we've seen with a number of other guests, is what really Vince was passionate about, and what informed him was his reading. And he loved to quote from different books. And you can see that how that the reading has helped shape his thought process and how he integrates that into how he communicates and shares his views. So, yeah, my last back to school quote would be to say, your challenge for the next quarter is go and find a book which isn't a novel and stretch your imagination, or listen to a podcast, or go and actually go and listen to an audiobook, because I think that's I know even with myself over the summer period, with being distracted doing lots of other things, my pace of reading has definitely slowed. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on, getting back on as the nights get longer, is actually sitting down and getting back into some and reading and educating myself. So with that as a final note, we have been Just About Managing Podcasts. He's Lee Smith, he's Chris Dingle, and I'm John Lloyd. Thank you for listening and watching. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and now we are on YouTube. Please subscribe, like, follow. We'd love to also hear any feedback you have on us and suggestions for future episodes. And we'll see you at the next one.